How do you feel? Like when I dated, it would have been the last question in my mind, are you a Democrat or are you a Republican? The last question in my mind. And I honestly want to know what, because I have a student here from MGE, very accomplished person in general. She moved to Florida during COVID. Now, the reason she moved to Florida during COVID was not the weather. She said she couldn't, her ideology, her political affiliation started shifting. You could tell which way it shifted. She moved to Florida, okay? And she just said she couldn't, politics was such a major issue with guys that she was dating. What's your feeling about that?
So to me, politics are as much of a deal as you want them to be. So if you are an incredibly political person and you are asking those questions before a date, I had a client a couple days ago call me and she said, Aaron, I canceled this first date with a guy on Hinge because he said, I need to know your beliefs on the following. She said, I already know he's going to be polarizing. Even if our beliefs are kind of similar, he's going to want to talk about it all the time. And I just don't want that to drive compatibility. So it just depends. So that guy, the one that she canceled the date on, it's really important to him. So he needs to find somebody who is in line with him in that way. I don't think it's a big deal. I don't think people should talk about it. I also think that it's similar to observance levels. If you're extreme in anything, if you're extreme in your observance and you're not wavering, if you're extreme in your political beliefs, if you're extreme in anything, then you need to confront it. You need to find your match for that. But it really depends on where you personally stand, in my opinion. So for me, it's not a big deal. I'm not very extreme with many things. I'm very flexible. So it hasn't been an issue for me, but it's an issue for clients. It's an issue for people, right, like you said.
And so let's take it away from Republican, Democrat. Let's say conservative versus liberal, because then we get more into values.
I hear that more, yeah.
Because now we're talking about values. And obviously, can we date, can a liberal date a conservative? Can someone who is not hard right date someone who's very left? That's not going to work, obviously. But somebody who's a little right of center, be comfortable in your mind and fall in love, have a family, children together, navigate the value differences.
Yes.
Between a conservative and a liberal.
And it depends on the values. Like I do see that people will argue on tiny specifics, and I try to get them to think big picture, like family, like how you want to raise your kids, how you actually want to live, the big things instead of just the nitty gritty. And I feel like people get really tied up in the little things, or they'll see a story in current events and they will just attack a very specific story, and I try to bring them back and recenter and say, well, think about the big goals you have on how you're going to raise your family, where you want to live. And when you can bring it back and realize that like there are bigger morals and values to things, and you find common ground. But I do find that politics in general, they're not that sexy. And again, my first date rules, I'm trying to make your environment conducive for romance.
So no political conversations day one?
I like to keep it kind of general. Like if you just kind of establish it and then change the subject, okay? If you find out, even if you have a lot in common. Now, that being said, I did go to Georgetown and I just spent a lot of time in DC. Those people turn each other on over politics, okay? And one of my clients, you're gonna love this, it's a guy who told me, like, Aaron, I gotta tell you about this date I just had last week. He goes, she showed up wearing the exact same thing as me, a blue button down, khakis, and loafers. And he said, and all we did was talk politics. It was so sexy. So that works down there, okay? So again, up here I see a very different, I love studying romance, dating, and also politics on a geographic difference. Like the differences when you go all over this country is one thing I specialize in. I lived in Miami and all I did was do studies and polls. I'm from a small town in Georgia. It's very different to be a conservative and a liberal in a small town in Georgia and then to move up to New York. I've seen so much. And so it really depends. It's a part of the getting to know you process, but I try to get people to change the subject when it comes to veering off on a first date on what I believe isn't like conducive to romance. Mm-hmm. And those topics can veer off really quick. So I try to teach people how to segue. It's good to establish those, but don't let it dictate the entire conversation.